Indeed. Let's just remind you of those live pictures that we've been looking at. The Tripoli skyline with smoke billowing from a range of targets. Fierce fighting has been going on well into, well, certainly from the early hours of this morning in certain areas. Seems to have grown fiercer in the last hour or so. We've been looking at a panorama of the Tripoli skyline reflecting that fact. Lots of gunfire in the background as well. Keep looking at those pictures while I tell you that America's backing of Western intervention in Libya, which was limited to backing NATO airstrikes, didn't always go down too well with some elements in the Republican Party. But one senior figure on the right argued long and hard for increased backing for the rebels, including providing training, weapons and close air support on the battlefield. John McCAIN went as far as launching a bipartisan resolution authorising the limited use of US armed forces in Libya. So what does he think now? Senator McCAIN joins us live from Phoenix in Arizona. Senator, a warm welcome to you. You were in Benghazi in April. You were arguing then for an increased American military contribution in Libya. What's your current thinking?
My current thinking, first of all, is deep gratitude to the British government and people and the brave men and women in the armed forces who, along with the French and a few other countries, led this fight and made this moment possible. The United States has had significant involvement in support and use of Predator and other, but the fact is that we should have used the full weight of American air power, and this conflict would have ended a lot earlier and saved a lot of Libyan lives. I heard the conversation that you had earlier on the program. I think what the Libyans are really going to want from us is the kind of technological help that helps them set up a government, provide goods and services to the people, the kind of government that they haven't had for 42 years. And I believe that, well, I think we should all contribute to that, but I think the Libyans will have money to pay for it.
Some might say, Senator, that had American air power been available, all it really would have done is accelerate the process, a process that gets us where we are now with the rebels at the gates of the Gaddafi compound. And you will know yourself, from your own military experience, there are limitations, are there not, on what you can do from 15,000 feet. Ultimately, you have to commit on the ground.
Well, I would say that's true everywhere, but in Libya, because air power can dominate with this kind of flat terrain, with long distances between population centers. Now it's much more difficult, and when we get into this urban fighting, and that makes the air power a lot less effective. But there's no doubt that the air power was the major factor, plus a lot of courageous and brave young Libyans who were willing to sacrifice it, brought about it's a matter of time now with Gaddafi, and exactly what the circumstances are is not clear, but this is the end. But we've got to secure these depots that have huge amounts of weapons in them. We've got to go and secure the prisons where there's hundreds, if not thousands, of political prisoners being held. We want to preserve the buildings. We don't want to see a repeat of Baghdad, and we want to get the government functioning as quickly as possible. And I think we can be very helpful in that respect. But I understand the sentiment of the British people that they don't want troops on the ground. Americans don't either. And frankly, I am of the belief that they will not be necessary.
Under any and all circumstances, can you conceive of any situation where Western peacekeeping troops might be needed?
I can see where monitoring, I can see where some areas, particularly humanitarian assistance, look, they've just been through a bloody civil war. There's going to be a need for that kind of thing, and I'm sure that a lot of European countries that haven't been involved, as the British and the French have, will be willing to come forward with that kind of assistance. But the kind of Iraq or Afghanistan, quote, peacekeeping or that kind of thing, I just do not believe that that's going to be necessary, and I understand British and American public opinion that they don't want to be involved in another conflict. I agree with that. I was for increased air power, as you know.
Yeah. Just tell us, in a sense, how important the right outcome from this conflict is, not least for the credibility of NATO, an organisation which won the Cold War, was critical to the security of the West. How much does it matter for the reputation of NATO that there is an outcome here that NATO can be proud of?
I think it's important, and again, I think the British and the French particularly, I think Qatar and UAE have been very helpful. I think that, that this is very important, but also let me just say, this is an extenuation of that young man burning himself to death in Tunisia. I believe that Bashar Assad will go, maybe different circumstances, but I think change is going around the world, and it all started with a young man in Tunisia. We live in the most interesting and in many ways exhilarating, but also unpredictable times.
There are many of your countrymen, Senator McCain, who feel that America has unfinished business with Colonel Gaddafi. Tell me what you think should happen to him, and also what should happen to al-Megrahi, the Lockerbie bomber, who many in your country felt it was wrong for Britain to release on medical grounds.
Well, first of all, what I would love to see ideally, and a lot of this will be up to the Libyans, to the TNC, but I'd like to see him in the dock in the International Criminal Court. I think, and all of his things that, the crimes that he's committed over the years be exposed. As far as our friend is concerned, he was released on the grounds that he was dying. Obviously, he's not dying, so maybe he ought to go back to prison in Scotland, huh? What do you think?
Well, I don't know. It's not for me to say, but I know many Americans, indeed many Britons, feel that's true. I know you've talked before, and it's a complex picture in Tripoli. It's a complex picture in Libya. I know you've talked before about the danger of oversimplification of this country's woes, and in particular, the tribal aspect to what's going on. Gaddafi belongs to one tribe. Many of the rebels belong to another tribe. It's a dense patchwork, is it not?
Yes, it is. And by the way, keep your eye on Sirte, Gaddafi's hometown. That'll be very interesting, and that'll be a place where I hope that the TNC will be well instructed not to commit atrocities or human rights abuses. And I understand the temptation, but I'm glad to see that they're at least getting out ahead on that and saying that that's not what is right. We want national reconciliation. I think that any country that's never known democracy, that for 42 years has suffered under this kind of leadership, is going to have a lot of difficulties. But there's people from all over the world, Libyan Americans, British Libyans, who will come to Libya to help. There will be all kinds of technological and technical assistance provided, and I believe we can succeed. There's always the element of chance in these things. So now we have succeeded militarily. Now the major challenge of building democracy will come. You remember, the United States of America took us about 100 years in a bloody civil war to figure out exactly what kind of country we wanted to be.
Senator, I know you're pressed for time, but I have one more question, and it's exactly on that point about democracy. How much faith, how much belief do you have in the Transitional National Council that they can provide a transparent and effective government for the people of Libya?
I have great confidence in them, and I understand the challenges. Now we have to have more representatives from the western part of Libya in the TNC. They've got to get into Libya, Tripoli, as quickly as possible and set up the government there and start functioning. We have to free up their money as quickly as possible so that they can start providing the basic services that government owes its people. How they perform in the next month, in my view, will have a great, great determining factor on whether they will succeed or fail. There's a lot of good people in the TNC, and there's some people that maybe I wouldn't have chosen, but overall, look, I'm an eternal optimist, and so I'm going to be optimistic here and say that a lot of countries are going to step forward and want to be of assistance, and frankly, I'd be one of the
Senator John McCain, thanks very much indeed.